Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Thursday, October 29th, 2015. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We have got lots of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Don is sitting in our control room today, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. And I want to respond to one of the stories we heard on the news break just before the show began about how China has abandoned its one-child-only policy, and they've now said married couples may have 2 children. And critics are saying even that will not be enough to rebuild China's workforce because they're dealing with this drastic reduction in population and lack of workers. I have a suggestion. Why don't we just box up a couple of million illegal immigrants and Middle Eastern refugees and send them on over there to China? They'll bring them on in and solves 2 problems at one time. I don't know why the government doesn't listen to me. I come up with these really good ideas from time to time. All right, last night obviously was the Republican debate, and it was a bit of a circus. And before I get into it, I want to remind you how after the Democrat debate, the corporate media pulled down all their polls that showed Sanders had won, and replaced them with stories of Hillary's victory to fool the people who had not actually watched the debate. Well, the corporate media is doing it again. They're ignoring polls showing that Trump won last night handily and claiming that Marco Rubio won for, get this, according to an article that came out of CNBC no less, successfully defending the fact that he wasn't showing up for work in the Senate due to his presidential campaign. Well, that doesn't make Rubio look so good, so now they've changed the story. They're declaring Rubio the winner of last night's debate because he got more Google searches during the debate than anybody else, which, as you know, can be rigged. I mean, that's how absurd it's getting. Now, the online polls all over the place are showing Trump won the third GOP debate. Let's see. Drudge's poll had Trump with 54%. Last time I checked my own poll, Trump was 87%. And the media is out there saying, oh, absolutely, it was Rubio. It was Rubio. Don't even think about Trump here. You know, it's Hillary and Rubio because Hillary knows she can beat Rubio. Remember what I told you the other day about strategy and tactics Hillary learned from Richard Nixon's committee to reelect the president when she was working on the Watergate committee. Now, there's an article that came out of Esquire that makes a really good observation. We almost didn't need the moderators there last night because the candidates all came in with points they wanted to make, things they wanted to say, and it was almost ludicrous where the moderators would ask a question and the candidate would pretty much ignore it and try and find some path from the question to a pre-rehearsed statement on what their policy is. And it really made the whole thing rather laughable. Now, over at Alternative Right Blogspot, they're drawing a parallel between the current GOP debates and the John F. Kennedy, Richard Nixon debates. Because a very interesting thing that was noticed, when Kennedy and Nixon were debating for Kennedy's first run for the White House, people who heard the debate on the radio thought Nixon had won. People who watched the debate on TV thought Kennedy had won because he was charismatic, telegenic. Nixon had a really bad makeup artist. It's become almost something of a joke. And today we've got the same thing. Trump is personable. He's got presence across the media. Jeb Bush just looks like somebody's nephew that they're trying to give a job to. Classic Neppet. And of course, as you heard, Paul Ryan has now been elected Speaker of the House, which won't change anything except the name on the parking space. Let's grab a couple of phone calls here real quick. Matthew in Maryland, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, I heard you, I think it was yesterday, quote something from the Common Sense show, and, or at least, mention an article from there. And I read the Common Sense show for quite a while, and I really, in my personal opinion, I think it's fear porn. I mean, the guy claims to have, military insider contacts that he never, can source.
Oh, okay. All right. Can you share what is your specific point that you're trying to make?
Well, that was just a side point that I wanted to make. The real point that I wanted to talk to you about was, it was really aggravating that a caller on the other day that was saying that, the American soldiers overseas should be, basically murdered and put in rubbish bags and sent back over here. We can't rebuild this nation. We can't look ahead saying, okay, the government is going to screw things up and we know this and we have to be ready to put things back together. It's just, we can't have that type of attitude. These soldiers.
Well, now, wait a minute. The caller wasn't saying that was the attitude of the Americans. For one thing, the caller is from outside the United States of America. But he's saying that all of these nations that the U.S. has intervened in to regime change and take control of their economy would be justified in having that attitude toward our military people. Now, I don't agree with that. But I do agree with the realization that our military people signed up to protect the United States of America, and instead they've basically been turned into a bunch of plundering hordes, going into other people's country, kicking out the government, taking control of their wealth, and it's going to create hostility in those other countries, okay?
No, we should just bring them home. I wish we could.
I agree. We should bring them home. We should bring them home, put them to work on the infrastructure. And there is so much that's gone wrong with this country during this wartime economy, and we do. We need to bring everybody back into the United States of America and focus our national will on rebuilding the United States, repairing the infrastructure, getting the water flowing again, get the storm drains running, get our manufacturing back, get some agricultural produce going that somebody around the world is actually going to want to buy. This is what we should be doing, but unfortunately we have a government that gets itself into messes and then gets into world wars to get out of them. It's a repeating pattern. Crash of 1907, World War I, crash of 1929, World War II, crash of 2008. Look how far into World War III we are right now. And unfortunately, the problem is that this is the way government and the money junkies think. The good news is the third time is a charm, and Americans are waking up and realizing that this has been the pattern all along, and that's why the U.S. government has really lost the propaganda initiative, and they're struggling to get it back, and they're thrashing around, but they're not getting any traction.
Well, I agree with you. Maybe it's just from my perspective, it just sounded like it was a very negative comment, and I'm not even, picking on this person individually. It just sounded very negative towards our troops, and I don't appreciate what they're doing.
Let me ask you a question. Matthew, let me ask you a question. How do you think the people in all those countries the Nazis marched into felt about those Nazi troops?
I'm sure they didn't like them.
Okay, well, there you go. I mean, the fact of the matter is the U.S. government has been behaving badly. The U.S. military is the instrument of that bad behavior. And while I personally don't have an issue with anybody in uniform, other people are going to have different opinions based on watching their countries destroyed before their very eyes. Not one of these countries.
I understand that.
Okay, all right. Well, then you can understand why maybe the rest of the world is starting to look at the United States and its military the way that Europe looked at the Nazis. I mean, the parallels are just...
I just think that, the guy comes from a country that was extremely imperialistic. And, I just think I do agree with you. I can't argue your point. You're right.
Okay.
If I was in Syria right now, how would I like the American military? I wouldn't.
Yeah.
I can't disagree with you. I just don't like I know those men and women that are overseas, whatever it is they're being forced to do or they're doing, it sucks. And,
and they know it's bad, and they're paying a personal price for it because, they're being given all these antidepressants and medications to try and reconcile the fact that they know none of this is a just, moral, righteous war. They're just out there looting and pillaging. Matthew, I got to let you go. We got to take a break for the commercials. We'll be back with another phone call after these few words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And Fox News is showing this absolutely ludicrous display right now. It's basically a replay of the tape from the debates, the key moments, and over it they have this chart of the instant response from GOP voters. Apparently they had a bunch of people there with buttons like, don't like, and we're tracking the favorability of the candidate in real time. I mean, that'll work on a beauty contest or maybe even a talent contest, but nobody really has had time to think about what the candidates were actually saying to make any of that instant feedback relevant at all. It's just another way of the media saying, don't think for yourself. We'll tell you who the candidates are going to be. All right, let's grab a phone call here. Steve in Massachusetts, thank you for waiting. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Mike. Just to touch up a little on that last conversation. Now, the way it is you want to support the United States and its troops, but you don't want to support its leaders and its policies. You know, it's a fine line of what to root for and what not to root for. Like, I'm rooting for Putin, but at the same time, I'm not rooting for the mercenaries.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough moral dilemma for anybody out there, and you know, they knew this was coming all the way back in I think it was the Clinton administration. They were coming out there saying, you know, it's impossible to love your country and hate your government. The two are bound together. No, they're not. Thomas Paine wrote that, you know, you have to be loyal to the nation and your countrymen, sometimes in opposition to the government. You should be loyal to America at all times. You should be loyal to the American people at all times. You should be loyal to the government only when it deserves it. It certainly does not now. Now, I'm obviously opposed to the wars. I think we owe a debt of honor to take care of all these young kids who put those uniforms on and came back with serious injuries and illnesses. And our government is failing that. They just use these kids up, and now they're just throwing them away. And that's another reason to question the wisdom of all of this. But obviously, again, we're all waking up to the realization that in this world war, it is the United States that is the instigator and the aggressor. And if we're not able to stop this and derail it, 50 years from now, the world will look on the Stars and Stripes with the same revulsion our generation looked on the swastika. And I don't want that to be something that our descendants in the United States have to grow up to bear, that shame that will be thrown on them even though they had nothing to do with it. Just like the people of Germany today, who hadn't even been born in World War II, are constantly being shamed by Israel and, of course, then asked for more money.
The real reason why I'm calling is, now when they decided to raise the debt ceiling, does that coincide with Russia dumping the treasuries, and the more the countries dump the treasuries, the more the U.S. has to keep buying them?
I think, no, it isn't, because it isn't the U.S. government buying back the treasuries, it's the Federal Reserve. And that doesn't go on the U.S. government's debt statement. Basically what it is, we know the U.S. government actually went through the debt ceiling some months ago. And everybody's talking about it, so now they're making a big show about they're not raising the debt ceiling. They're suspending it. There is no debt ceiling from now until March 2017. The government can just borrow as much as they want, spend it wherever they want, and stick our great-grandchildren with the bill. But the debate really shouldn't be about the debt ceiling and whether it should be raised or lowered. It is time for the American people to start asking seriously, why, when the Constitution authorizes the government to create and issue its own debt-free currency, does our government persist in borrowing that currency at interest from a privately owned central bank and sticking the American people with those interest payments? That is the question every American needs to be asking right now. They're dealing with the same thing up in Canada with that Comer lawsuit. It's a giant scam. We are under the same system of banker enslavement that we fought a revolution to break free of, thanks to a corrupt Congress and a corrupt president.
Yeah, I mean, that's the root of all the problems, definitely.
It is. It's an impossible to sustain system. By design, private central banking creates more debt than money with which to pay that debt, uses that debt to control our lives until the debt reaches the point where it tears the whole system down. And before it gets there, that debt will drive governments to launch wars of conquest to steal other people's wealth to try and keep the payments going. And that really, I mean, do you realize that before the creation of the Federal Reserve, there was no such thing in history as a world war, and now we're into number 3?
Oh, yeah, and look at all the countries that are broke. And not to mention the people, but the countries. You know, it's just...
You know, and they talk about all this money that everybody owes, trillions and trillions and trillions. It doesn't exist. It never did. It's a bookkeeping trick.
Now, that's the same thing when you buy a house, too, isn't it?
Yeah, they just type the numbers into a computer, and it's instant credit to your account, but you have to work to pay that amount of borrowing back with interest. That's what keeps you enslaved to the ruling class. Those paper notes are your slave chains.
Not like the bankers worked really hard to obtain all that money and this.
No, they just created out of thin air. There was actually a lawsuit a while back where this bank was moving to foreclose on a home, and the homeowner challenged the legitimacy of the foreclosure by pointing out that the bank had not actually turned anything of value over to him other than their permission to buy the home, because they had simply typed the money into a computer. And the bankers got on the stand and said, yeah, that's how we work. Somebody comes to us for a loan, we type the number into the keyboard, and they're off and running. And the judge said, you're absolutely right. There's nothing of any value that was transferred by the bank at the beginning of the contract. That makes the contract null and void. And, of course, the judge got dejudged, and the lawsuit was never overturned, but it was declared, there's a legal term for it where it may not be cited as a precedent in any other cases that follow it. It's declared invalid, or there's a legal term and I don't remember what it is. But basically, they got the courts to come in and say, well, in this one case, this decision can't be used as a precedent for anybody else's mortgage action. And they've been trying to cover it up and hide it ever since.
But didn't some people mysteriously die too after that? I think the judge.
You're right. You're right. The judge died, and the lawyer in the case got disbarred.
See, what a coincidence.
Hey, listen, when the money junkies are feeling threatened, there's a lot of blood gets shed. That's just the reality of history.
Yeah, it's always protecting the money, always.
That's right.
You know, they don't care who gets
money
away.
is their god. Thou shalt have no other gods before the cash.
It's so dirty.
It's a little psychotic.
In so many ways.
You know, it's a little psychotic. We're risking the nuclear incineration of the surface of our planet in this argument over whose brand of ink and paper we're all supposed to be using. You know, forget about intelligent life in outer space. We need some here. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go ahead and grab another phone call right now. Al in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Al, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, good. You're on the air. What's on your mind?
Great. I've been listening to the last couple of callers call in. I mean, it sounds like people are starting to get really worried down in the United States. And with just cause, I'm really hoping that, Donald Trump is who he says he is, because, I mean, you people down in the United States need some hope. Things just changed up here in Canada a little bit. I mean, they're even talking about stopping police from carding people, which, I love. I don't even know how to have a cell phone because of privacy concerns. So, I'm really hoping that everything works out for people down the south of us. It's a big planet. I'm pretty sure we can all share it.
Well, we can. The reality is that properly developed and engineered, this planet can support the human population. The problem is there are a few individual humans who want to own it all and rent it to the rest of us. And there is the big problem.
Yeah, slavery.
Yes.
Well, I just wanted to call and say that, Mike, I appreciate what you're doing, and keep up the good work. Thank you very much.
Thank you for those kind words. I'm going to keep going just as long as I possibly can. Thank you for the call. We're going to let you go. Now, turning over to the war zones, emphasis on the plural. Over in Syria, the rebel commanders have gone on a bit of a whining jag. Russia's ruining our plan on a daily basis. It's not fair. We were told that we were going to be left alone as long as we attacked Assad. And what the commanders are discovering is that Russia is a formidable military. Russia's leadership, they've been in combat themselves, unlike the American leadership for the most part. And it is proving to be very effective. Now, the good news is the fraud of the war on terror perpetrated by the United States government against you, the American people, and the rest of the world is pretty much falling apart. And we're seeing articles from all over the place. This one's in Aleppo News, where basically saying ISIS is the terrorist battering ram being used by world powers to bring about regime change. They basically hijacked the idea of the Arab Spring, which was the beginning of all these countries wanting to kick out their U.S. puppets, and said, we can go on in there and we can find these nascent Arab Spring units and we can infiltrate them and we can buy them with money and we can turn them to our own purposes. And that's what they were trying to do. Unfortunately, they have pretty much messed it up. Because over in Washington, D.C. and the State Department, there's a lot of very faulty thinking going on. In fact, more than anything else, it's more wishful thinking than careful analysis. And they've had one foreign policy disaster after another, after another, after another. Now, Russia is opposing a draft United Nations resolution regarding Syria's use of what are called barrel bombs. This is a resolution being put together by France, Britain, and Spain. And Russia is opposed to it officially because this would put a strain on the upcoming Vienna talks on how to maybe settle this all down, forgetting that some of the participants in those talks don't want things settled down. What's really going on here, this resolution is an attempt to use the imprimatur of the United Nations to once again claim that it is Bashar al-Assad who's killing his own people. It's got nothing to do with the hired mercenaries and ISIS. It's all Assad's fault. A barrel bomb is nothing but another bomb. It's like dirty bomb. It sounds horrible. I don't even know what it's supposed to mean in this case. But it's just another way of trying to go on out and say, Assad is the bad guy. We're the good guys. Assad's the bad guy. You should hate him. Here's your 2-minute hate against Bashar al-Assad. Now, there's a very alarming report coming out of Pravda that ISIS now has the precursor chemicals for the production of chemical weapons. This is coming from Russian Foreign Ministry Mikhail Ulyanov. Now, who would give ISIS chemical weapons? I wonder. Of course, if ISIS carries out a chemical weapons attack, you know Assad's going to be blamed for it, or Russia will be blamed for it. Because you know the operational motto of the United States government. If at first you don't succeed, lie, lie again. Now, the Syrian army is continuing against the moderate head choppers, leaving the more extreme ones for Russia. But what's really interesting, as you know, the U.S. just had to admit, yeah, we're sending in more weapons and guns, to the people trying to overthrow Assad. And apparently they've botched that so bad, they wound up dropping the supplies into the hands of Syria's army. There's a video of it. They're celebrating, hey, free food, free ammo. We know the other guys were supposed to get it. Too bad. We're not going to call them up and ask them to pick it up. Now, here's where it gets really kind of alarming. There's this former U.S. military intelligence officer, Thomas Bonomo, and he is writing in International Affairs magazine, The National Interest, an article saying it is time for the U.S. to openly ally with ISIS in Syria if we're going to get that gosh darned Assad. Do you remember George Orwell's 1984, right in the middle of the war between East Asia and Oceania and the rest of it, and they switched sides? Instantaneous. And then from then on, anybody saying, wait a minute, were these, no, Oceania's always been our friends. We've always been at war with East Asia. What's wrong with you that you don't understand this? They're actually doing it. George Orwell wrote 1984 as a warning to the people about the rise of tyranny. He did not intend it to be the idiot's guide to world domination. But the idiots seem to think it is. I mean, that's it. Remember, ISIS and Al-Qaeda used to be bad. Now we're on their side because they're doing what we want to get Assad out of power in a country that has not actually attacked any U.S. interests, other than being an inconvenience to economic interests. But I mean, step back and think about it. Syria has not attacked the United States of America in any way, shape, or form. None of these countries that the U.S. has gone into in the last 13 years have actually attacked the United States of America. Everyone keeps going back, 9/11, see, it's all 9/11. They're all in cahoots. They were all behind 9/11. Well, the jury is still firmly out on exactly who was behind 9/11. And more Americans are starting to realize that the official 9/11 story is about as bogus as the official story about Saddam's nuclear weapons or the John F. Kennedy assassination. And the author of this atrocity may be much closer to home than the oil-rich regions of the world. Now, as part of the Russia bashing that we are seeing in the corporate media, and possibly to try and counter the very negative public relations coming out of the U.S. attack on a Doctors Without Border hospital in Afghanistan, and 2 attacks by the U.S. Saudi proxies on hospitals in Yemen. The last few days we've seen this story coming out about, well, Russia, they bombed a hospital in Syria. Russia definitely did it. Well, Red Cross in Syria is saying there's nothing to support that. There's a lot of hearsay and rumor. There are no actual reports that any hospital in Syria was hit with a Russian airstrike. It's another lie. Remember what Senator Hiram Johnson said. Truth is the first casualty of war. When nations go to war, lying becomes permissible. Lying becomes necessary in their eyes. Sun Tzu wrote in The Art of War, all war is based on deception. You will get no truth from the U.S. government when it is suffering from war fever. Got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And there's an article over in Sputnik News. Iran's importance for resolving Syrian crisis finally dawns on Washington. And it's basically saying that the U.S. government is finally admitting that Iran is indispensable to ending the civil war in Syria. Well, Sputnik normally has things pretty much down, but in this case, there's a little taste of Kool-Aid floating around this story. It's not a civil war. It's a covert attempt at an overthrow by the U.S. and its proxies inside Syria. And second, the U.S. does not want this to end other than with the removal of Assad and the installation of a U.S. puppet regime. I am getting a sneaking suspicion that Iran is being allowed into the new peace talks in order to set them up to catch the blame when it all falls apart down the road. Because remember, the U.S. still wants to come up with a reason why we should all fling our babies onto the Iranian bayonets. They haven't given that up. Remember, this program to drag the entire world back to Bretton Woods and the petrodollar is an all-or-nothing deal. They can't just conquer half the world and force them to use the dollar, because the rest of the world will just ignore them. And remember, any nation or nations that is not enslaved to a private central bank becomes an economic powerhouse. Nations enslaved to private central banks cannot compete with free nations. That's why the nations enslaved to private central banks are always declaring war on those nations trying to live without private central banks, like Germany in the 1940s, or Libya. All wars are bankers' wars. I'm going to presume you've all read the article by now. And maybe you should start sending it out to your friends who are trying to figure out, why is all this happening? Because when you understand that it's all being driven by the money junkies, all of a sudden it'll make sense. This is history that is most pointedly not taught to you in the state-controlled public schools, who are busy telling you that the correct way to solve 3 times 5 is to add 3, 5 times 3 plus 3. Now, John Kerry has come out with this very odd comment, trying to come up with a Syrian resolution is like charting a course out of heck. Well, you bozos in Washington, D.C. made this heck in the first place. Kerry and Obama are up there saying, we've got to find a solution to this mess, and hoping you don't realize this mess is created by the U.S. government, which cannot cure itself of the addiction to stick its nose into other people's countries and muck about the place. That's why the rest of the world hates us. They don't hate us for our freedoms. They don't hate us because we got Disneyland. They don't hate us because we got Miley Cyrus on a wrecking ball. They hate us because for decade after decade after decade, the U.S. government goes into their country overthrows the government, puts in a dictatorship, and proceeds to loot the place. Iran in 1953, Chile in 1973, tried it again in Iran in 2009, and on and on and on. That's how the U.S. maintains its empire, while pretending to be the blessing upon the world, exactly the same way Rome did. Rome lived on the pillage and plunder from the conquered provinces while going on out there and saying, hey, we built you a nice road, what are you complaining about? Now, Defense Secretary Ashton Carter has already kind of gone back on his earlier comment that we're not in active combat in Iraq. And then he turns around and says, well, yeah, it's combat. They're advisors, but they're wearing body armor, they're carrying guns, they're getting combat duty pay, they're getting the pins that say they've been in combat, they got the campaign shoulder patches. And he's out there saying, yeah, these advisors, they're carrying out their missions from time to time. And, so they're having their cake and eating it too. They're putting these troops into all these countries. They don't want you to know about it. Because we're the good guys. We're not the 21st century version of Nazi Germany just knocking off countries left and right. And I want to remind everybody one more time that neither Syria nor Iraq have asked the U.S. for ground troops. Syria certainly has not asked the United States to come in and bomb the place. It is the U.S. government that is the aggressor, going into countries it has no legal right to intervene in, but then it's been doing it all along. And they get you to go along with it with these lame hoaxes, like the fake nurse. Oh, the Iraqis were taking premature babies out of the Kuwaiti incubators. And it was all complete hoax, designed by Hill and Knowlton Public Relations. The nurse wasn't even a nurse. She was a daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador. It was a huge fraud. Hill and Knowlton's proud of it. They talk about it at advertising conventions. Look what we did. We got the U.S. to go to war. I don't know. I used to work in advertising. I don't think I'd feel very proud about that, but apparently some do. Because it's not their money and their kids. But under international law and the UN Charter, the United States' government is in the wrong. Now, with the recent revelations that the U.S. has been supporting ISIS and Al-Qaeda, Iran has come on out and said, look, it's time to realize the United States of America is creating and sponsoring these infamous terror groups. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and the Taliban. Now, I'm going to go easy on the Taliban. And yes, it's true, the United States supported them when they were the Mujahideen in Afghanistan to get rid of the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union, by the way, did not just invade Afghanistan for no reason. They invaded Afghanistan because they saw the U.S. coming on in there and trying to regime change the place. Now, the Afghan word Taliban simply means students. And that's what was left in charge after the U.S. pulled all support for Afghanistan after Charlie Wilson's war. Soviet Union's gone. We're out of here. And left Afghanistan on its own. And Afghanistan went its own way. And the U.S. declared that a bad thing. We have to go in and get those people out. They're not supposed to be allowed to run their own country. What are they thinking? Meanwhile, NATO is considering deploying 4,000 troops to the Russian borders. They're stationing permanent battalions in Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. They're rattling the sabers and sneering at the enemy as hard as they can. Now, another story over in Press TV, and it's starting from the Wall Street Journal, talking about these 1,000 soldiers that are going into these various countries. Don DeBar, who was on an interview in Press TV, he's a journalist and political activist, is saying it is very obvious the U.S. and its allies are getting ready for war with Russia. That's the goal. They want war with Russia and war with China. Actually, the war is the U.S. Federal Reserve note against the Russian ruble and the Chinese yuan. That's what's driving this. We're going to see billion people killed. and radioactive waste showered all over the planet in this argument over whose brand of ink and paper we're all supposed to use for the next 100 years. So if the U.S. wants to go to war with Russia, here's your rifle, Barry. And I would remind everybody who is a student of history, every major war since the start of the industrial age has ultimately been lost by the side that started the hostilities. Just something to keep in mind. Now, over in China, the U.S. is going to send more warships past those Chinese islands. Australia is joining on in. They're rattling their sabers. Article coming out of antiwar.com saying the U.S. idea of freedom of the seas means American global hegemony. And what the U.S. is doing is a repeat of the Arthur H. McCollum plan to provoke Japan into attacking Pearl Harbor. Now, McCollum created this 8-step plan to be followed by Roosevelt to just annoy and insult Japan until they had no choice but to attack us. And it was very cleverly designed to exploit the cultural differences between the U.S. and Japan. From the American point of view, these actions were trivial. What's the big deal here? But to the Japanese sensibilities, they were horrible, horrible insults until Japan walked into the trap and struck at Pearl Harbor. And this is what the U.S. is doing with these Spratlys. Most Americans are saying, so they sailed a ship past an island, what's the big deal? But to the Chinese, with their emphasis on face, it's a horrible insult. And this is the U.S. trying to goad China into doing something they can use as an excuse to start a war. We'll be right back after the news. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And Fox News is going on about the CNBC moderators for last night's debate are under fire for asking what were very obviously biased questions, trying to promote their candidate and to attack your candidate and make him look bad, which is what they do. You know, look at the corporate media. Remember the Fox synthetic bovine growth hormone lawsuit? There is no law that requires the corporate media to tell you the truth about anything. The management can order their prostitutes and correspondents to lie to you, and if they refuse to lie to you, they can be fired. Legally, justly. End of story. And that tells you all you need to know about the corporate media. Along with Brian Williams, caught in an absolute flat-out lie. He's still on the air, $8 million a year. Okay, now then, Iran has just announced they're going to send a fleet of warships to the Atlantic Ocean. And this appears to be just courtesy calls. Iran has announced that they're going to be putting into various ports around the Atlantic Ocean. Courtesy calls. Now, if the United States has a right to sail their warships within 12 miles of China, Iran has an equal right to sail across the Atlantic, international waters. But you know this is going to be denounced as an obvious Iranian provocation by the U.S. government and the corporate media here. Over in Turkey, things are getting very intense ahead of their elections. Erdogan has shut down the opposition TV station. And there is concern that if the election starts to go against Erdogan, he may just call it off and cancel it and say, all right, Turkey's a dictatorship. Because that's how any U.S. client nation ultimately will end up as. There's an article that came out from shtfplan.com asking if Obama has become mentally unstable with this deliberate provocation of China with the warships. Now, I'm not going to bet any money on the mental stability of anybody who seeks political office. And we do recall that report from Obama's first term in the White House where he was struggling with depression, and we know what the doctor's going to do. Have some pills. And we know those pills lead to very poor quality thinking, feelings of aggression. Remember that story we ran yesterday? Where Eli Lilly, there was a memo leaked out. They had known their flagship antidepressant was creating feelings of suicide and violence in the patients, and they hushed it all up. So if Obama and his people are on these medications, that is not a good thing. However, when you go back to the concept that what these wars are really all about is which piece of ink and paper we're all going to be using for the next century. We know that the U.S. has to provoke a war with Russia and with China, because the real enemy of the United States of America, the enemy of all that we hold dear, is the ruble and the yuan. Because the U.S. has become dependent on U.S. dollar hegemony and the petrodollar. They let our manufacturing decay, both in quality and quantity. Nobody wants our GMO agriculture. And if the U.S. financial system can't get a piece of the action of everybody else's global trade and banking, the system will collapse. So it's easy to chalk up Obama's behavior to mental instability, but no, there is an agenda behind there. They don't want you realizing that's what they're getting ready to sacrifice all of your sons and daughters for, to make the bankers happy. But that's really what it is. All wars are ultimately bankers' wars. Okay, as you know, they had elections in Ukraine, and the opposition did pretty good, but they're already screaming pro-government forces are trying to falsify the results of local elections that took place on the 25th. And they found all kinds of indications of voter irregularities, people registered in multiple polling stations. Vote count was not conducted in a proper way, meaning no witnesses, just backroom stuff. By golly, we have brought those people American-style democracy, haven't we? Moldova's parliament has now dismissed the cabinet, led by Valeriu Strelet. We're seeing all of these countries just outlawing opposition points of view. If you're not in favor of austerity and banker slavery, you can't serve in the government. Allegations of massive corruption. Nothing new there. All governments ultimately become corrupt. All governments are ultimately oligarchies. That's the reality. History has shown that. Now then, we're getting our usual dose of booga-booga over here in the U.S. and Europe. MI5 is warning that ISIS is planning a major attack on Britain. See, what they're trying to do is get ahead of the growing awareness that the U.S. and its allies actually set up ISIS, created them, trained them, funded them. The only way they can do that is to ramp up the booga-booga to remind us all how ISIS is the enemy and ISIS is evil. We would never, ever do business with somebody that slimy. Meanwhile, here in the United States, the FBI is claiming there's an anarchist plot to ambush and kill police officers on Halloween, coming from a group called the National Liberation Militia. I mean, that name alone tells you this is all bogus. The reason all of this is going to fail, ultimately, is because our government of Great Britain, all of these players, they're still dominated by these Cold War fossils who are still trying to play the game by the rules and tricks that worked a half century ago. And they do not comprehend how in the age of the Internet, the fundamental nature of the flow of information through society has changed dramatically. They keep playing the same dirty tricks over and over again. Because it worked 50 years ago. I don't know why it's not working today. It just doesn't make any sense here. Meanwhile, the FBI is also out there saying that people should stop filming the police because it's making the police look bad. No, the police look bad because they're being bad and trying to demonize the messengers in this. That's not going to work. It's not going to solve the problem. But they're not interested in solving the problem. They just want things to look good. It's like the way they treat the homeless, especially here in Hawaii. And we now have over 7,000 homeless people here in Hawaii. Most of them on this island, Oahu. They're not trying to feed these people or get them jobs or anything. They're just shooing them away from where the tourists are. They have no interest in solving the problem. They just want it to look good. Another hallmark of fascist thinking. Another young unarmed man has been murdered by the IDF in cold blood in Hebron. Eyewitnesses are saying this guy was just walking down the street, walking normally, no weapons, nothing. And he was shot by 2 IDF soldiers who are apparently shooting from concealment. Was shot 12 times, died on the spot. Now, apparently on next Monday, November 9th, there's going to be a protest outside the White House, protesting against Netanyahu and Israel's treatment against the Palestinians. If you're anywhere near Washington, D.C., I encourage you to look at the information. It's posted to WhatReallyHappened.com and be there. And if nothing else, maybe we can give Abe Foxman a stroke as he runs around screaming, "You're all anti-Semites! You're all anti-Semites! You're all anti-Semites! You're all anti-Semites!" We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to start grabbing some phone calls here, and the first one is Donna in Mexico. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Thanks for taking my call. I wanted to talk about the 2 Australian warships that are going to the South China Sea. And I, very much like you did, believed they were going to follow the U.S. lead to challenge, those waters. But in actuality, I read this morning that they're there to do a joint naval drill with the Chinese Navy. And
really? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, stand corrected.
Well, no, listen, there's a lot of topsy-turvy stuff going on. And now on Tuesday, a French naval ship arrived to make a port of call stop in China. This is before some French President Hollande's going to be going at some point in the next month to meet with the Chinese president. So, and they're actually going to, the French ship, their navy is going to have going onto Chinese ships, and they're going to get the Chinese go on to the French ship, and then they're going to play soccer. So there's a lot of weird stuff going on here, but I thought it was really interesting. Right now, at least for the moment, Australia is not following the line of the U.S. and saying that they have the right to hold these, they have a history of long engagements in with regional navies and can do pretty much whatever they want with whom. So,
okay, well, see, my mistake was the first report I read about the Australian ships going up there appeared in American media.
That's the one I read.
Yeah,
the
same one. And as it turns out, they're trying to claim that Australia is supporting the U.S. and China, and now because of your due diligence, we find out that no, in point of fact, and we already know that France is backing away from the U.S. agenda in these areas. So the U.S. is finding itself alone in the world, and I think there's no better illustration of that than the recent UN vote to end the blockade against Cuba, where the entire United Nations General Assembly voted their opposition to the blockade, only 2 votes in favor of continuing it, the United States and Israel. And so it looks like the U.S. and Israel are pretty much the Axis powers going into this new world war.
And it's high time for that, and that's all I wanted to say.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you very much here, and we're going to switch over to Andrea in Oklahoma. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, aloha. I was basically concerned, we've sent all our jobs, along with all the equipment, to other countries, and we've been creating a lot of junk, as you call it, the debacles, to declare that we may possibly go to war with Russia when their equipment and everything, it would be a slaughter. Maybe I can see them doing it, but I hate the thought that they would. I think it's suicide totally and completely if they truly continue on this path. And I just think
I'm starting to study Russian and Chinese living here in Hawaii. I have a dread that it may become useful somewhere down the road here. But you're absolutely right. The U.S. is caught up in its self-made illusion of invincibility. We've never lost a war. Vietnam doesn't count. But if you actually study what happened in both World War I and World War II, the U.S. kind of came in on the side that was already winning. And then tried to get Hollywood to convince everybody that this was solely the U.S. victory in these two wars, and that is absolutely not the case. But what made the U.S. A power in big mistake number one and big mistake number two was our manufacturing. And especially that manufacturing was why Hitler did not, in fact, want to go to war with the United States of America and pointedly ignored several provocations that Roosevelt did against German shipping in the North Atlantic. But we don't have that advantage anymore. As you point out, we've let our manufacturing decline. We've offshored it. We go to other countries for what we need. Those factories are empty, rusted hulks. The machinery has either been sold off or it's corroded to usefulness. It's not like we could walk into these abandoned factories, flip on the lights, and start manufacturing. It's just not going to happen like that. And I'm sure that Washington, D.C. is the verdict of history is with us. We've always won. And they're really not evaluating this objectively. We're not the industrial power we once were. We're not the military power we once were. Our stockpiles have been drawn down by 13 years of war. And again, because everything the U.S. military-industrial complex produces is all about making money, we're sending our kids into battle here with stuff that really doesn't work. Remember that big stink over the body armor in Iraq? Where there was this guy who
yes, I do.
Had the sole contract for body armor for the U.S. military, and he was insanely rich. He spent something like $10 million on his daughter's bat mitzvah, hired this big rock band to come and perform. And his body armor wasn't very good. It was found out it was breaking down rapidly under the heat and perspiration of the soldiers. And the families of the soldiers wanted to buy some decent body armor, like the Dragon Scale stuff, and the U.S. government said, no, you have to use the body armor we give you. If you get killed using somebody else's body armor, your family won't get the death benefit. And it's just all about politics and corruption and favoritism, and our kids are in there with stuff that looks really good, but at the end of the day, it doesn't work very well. Remember that documentary they had about how all the kids in Iraq were having to do their own modifications to the Hummers to get them to work and to be somewhat safe, and they were salvaging equipment and welding it on, and everybody said, oh, how ingenious they are. And yes, they were being ingenious because they were scared, but why weren't the Hummers adequate to the task when they got there, as expensive as they are?
The thing is, you've said if we do have a war between Russia and China and everybody loses, but let's say we just lose because we aren't equipped, would Israel care if we lost?
No, Israel wouldn't care at all. In fact, Israel would love for the world's nuclear powers to decimate each other. That would leave Israel with its nuclear arsenal pretty much calling the shots. Failing that, Israel would love nothing better than to get all the world's Christians and all the world's Muslims hating each other and killing each other. I mean, yeah.
That's the way I'm seeing it.
Yes.
Well, that was my comment. Thank you.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Yeah. Wars are never fought for the reasons you're given. I recall a song by that name from somebody I know and love. All righty, let's see. Getting on to the economic news here. Story out of Investment Watch blog. If you are using accurate inflation data, like the Chapwood Index, we're already in a depression. We've been in a depression. There is a record number of Americans who are feeding themselves and their families selling blood plasma to make ends meet. Talking yesterday about how over in Great Britain, they're socially acceptable for young college girls to use this website to hook up with some rich old guy. Here in the U.S., when the economy tanked in 2008, our own government was telling American women, you should consider the sex trade. You can make good money there. That's where we are. We'll be back with more news after this. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show today. We're still talking about the economy. Now, Deutsche Bank is in serious trouble. They've actually been in trouble for a while. They've gone through a major management change. And they're now reporting a gigantic loss of billions, in the billions. They're going to cut 35,000 jobs. They're going to completely abandon operations in 10 countries. Their new CEO is formulating what is called the Strategy 2020, putting together a plan to get Deutsche Bank to the end of the decade. And they're definitely struggling. They're thrashing over there. Now, yesterday we were talking about how the EU was arm-twisting some of their member nations to stop buying weapons from Russia and start buying weapons from the United States. And it seems like there's a lot of that extortion going on, because we got another story today from srbin.info. The European Union has now issued new conditions for Serbia, demanding that they implement sanctions against Russia by the end of the year, or there will be no more assistance to their country. You will hate the people we tell you to hate. Now, there's another scandal brewing. This is being reported over in TASS. As you know, when Greece got into trouble, the money junkies were very brutal. But they're cutting Kiev a huge amount of slack. And now the IMF is getting ready to violate their own rules by continuing to lend money to Kiev despite Kiev's refusal to pay $3 billion to Moscow. Now, the current IMF rules are you do not qualify for any more lending if you're in default on any of your existing debt. And the IMF is saying, we're going to make an exception for Kiev. And, of course, immediately you're going to see other countries saying, well, you've got to make that exception for us. The black hole of debt is swallowing the world. That 11th marble has grown to the size of the asteroid that killed off all the dinosaurs, and it's heading our way. Minnesota's student debt ranks 5th highest in the nation. And the 10th healthcare co-op created under Obamacare has now collapsed, leaving 50,000 customers struggling to find new Obamacare-compliant insurance. What a wonderful program that was. Let's grab a phone call here. John in Barbados. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. I don't want to really pour more trouble on troubled waters, but I was reading a report from the Pentagon about a new missile that's just been put into service with Russia and Iran, and the NATO name is the Sizzler.
Yes.
And apparently the Deputy Defense Secretary, who also is the head of the procurement arm for materials and military equipment, went to the committee in the Congress and said, well, I'm not going to purchase anymore until you put forward a proposal of how to counteract this Sizzler. No matter what weapon they use, this Sizzler moves so fast and dodges from side to side, even these rapid-fire guns cannot track it.
Well, you know, what you're talking about, this Sizzler, actually happened quite some time ago. But the reality is that both China and Russia have developed even more improved versions of their missiles that are specifically designed to locate, identify, and target U.S. aircraft carriers. And China just unveiled their latest one. It's got a 1,200-mile range. It's maneuverable during the terminal phase. And one of the reasons the Navy is trying to deploy all these laser weapons is because the phalanx close-in weapon system cannot engage a maneuvering inbound target. All of these U.S. defenses, whether it's the ballistic missile defense or the Sea-Wiz or any of these, all based on the assumption that the incoming threat is following a predictable path. And so it was fairly trivial for both Russia and China to say, okay, we're not going to make our incoming threat predictable anymore. And Russia's latest generation of MIRV warheads are maneuverable. They corkscrew, they dipsy-doodle, they swing back and forth, and they can still hit their targets. And the same thing is true of the terminal guidance on these ship-killing missiles. And I think one of them is actually able to reach Mach 10. That's an absolute insane speed at sea level.
Well, apparently, if you combine that to this A2D2 system that Russia's just deployed in Syria, which blanks all NATO communications and radar systems like they did to the Donald lame duck in the Black Sea, combined with this missile, is suicide for the American sailors.
Yeah, it's going to be very, very ugly. And remember, what Russia is putting on display in Syria are those weapons platforms they want to sell to other countries. And I am sure that Russia has buried deep inside their nation somewhere a lot of goodies they've developed that nobody knows about yet.
Well, yeah, I mean, Mr. Putin did say a year or so ago he would turn Syria into Vietnam. He would put equipment into Syria that has never been seen before outside Russia.
Well, he also said that about Iran. Russia also said that about Iran. Their strategy was to turn it into the new Vietnam and wear the U.S. down in a war of attrition. The U.S. came back and said, well, our goal is to turn Syria into the new Afghanistan and wear Russia down in a war of attrition. Unfortunately, Russia's got a strong economy. It weathered the U.S. economic attacks on it very, very well. They've got their own manufacturing. And right now, the U.S. economy is so fragile, the U.S. dare not get into a war of attrition because they can't survive it.
Well, I remember the NATO, if you like, meme years ago where they said, oh, we don't need such a lot of equipment because we're so much more advanced than the Russians.
Yeah, well, that's what Hitler was thinking toward the closing days of World War II.
Yeah, and it seems to have been stopped dead in its tracks. I think this Syria conflict is more than, if you like, a break on American hegemony. It's changing the whole world concept. People are breaking away from America now.
Yeah, I mean, what's going on in Syria, if you believe the official story that the U.S. was in Syria to get ISIS and Al-Qaeda, it has shown that the U.S. has lost its military dominance. Russia's come in and accomplished more against ISIS and Al-Qaeda in 3 weeks than the U.S. did in an entire year. We know it's all a hoax, and more of the world is learning it's a hoax, but America's military supremacy is turning out to be a paper tiger, an illusion, and they can't back it up. And to actually provoke a war with either Russia or China, they've got to be on antidepressants over there in Washington, D.C. if they actually think that they're going to get through a conventional war with Russia and China without having to resort to the nuclear arsenal.
Well, I think the people in Washington, D.C. seems to still believe in American exceptionalism, and I think it's a total delusion.
Well, whom the gods would destroy, they first make proud. And, arrogance has brought down more empires than enemy action.
Apparently, the Iraqis now are telling America, no more troops. We don't need them. We don't want them.
Yeah.
I wonder what... And they've invited Russia in too.
Yeah, I know. Listen, we got to let you go and take a break for commercials here. We got more calls waiting on the line here. Thank you very much, John, and we'll be back with more phone calls after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show today. Let's grab a couple of phone calls here. John in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Good afternoon. I have two questions I would like to ask you and for you to ponder on, and I would like to get your answers to. One question is, I'm pretty young. I graduated in the early 2000s. But if I came back to you when you were the young teen or late 20s, Michael, and I told you this will be technology that you're going to be able to use to access anything in the world in your lifetime, what would you have told me? And also, is today's generation of youth and young adults, would your generation have used this technology a lot better? And I want your opinion on why is that? Thank you. I would like to get your answer.
Okay. Well, first of all, being from a science background and a big fan of the future, at least back then, anybody could look at the early computer systems and the global telecommunications network and realize it was just a matter of time before the two merged. So that was never something that caught anybody by surprise. As to which generation would have used it more effectively, I think that's kind of speculative and pointless, other than to say that if the people of Europe had had the internet in the 1940s, Hitler would have never gotten out of his art school gig. And certainly I think what is standing in the way of the plans for a new world war now is the fact that the planners of the war have not been able to succeed in bamboozling the people of planet Earth into going along with it. So I think it goes back to what I said before, that all of these Cold War fossils who are at the heads of governments or advisors to governments, they're still trying to play the game by the rules that worked 50 years ago. It's not working, and they don't understand why, because they can't grasp how fundamentally information flow through society has changed. And in that lack of awareness is our greatest hope that we're going to get out of this without a nuclear war.
But do you think it's because of the education why your generation, and my father's around your age, and he told me he was able to work in summer to go through college, but he went to the library all the time, and that's how they got their knowledge. But was really the education so much better back then, even in the public school sector? Yeah,
I would say that it was, and I know that because, first of all, I remember pretty much what I went through in public school, especially growing up in Loudon, and then high school. And then years later, my first experience with teaching was at the high school level in Southern California. I taught a year of remedial math, and it so disgusted me, that's why I got out of it. And even back then...
What gave you the fire, though?
Say again?
What gave you the fire? What gave you the fire as a youth, though? Because, I mean, I have young cousins that are in their adolescence, 8, 10, and the fire is not there. Like, when you try to tell them, you know, the great stuff that they could learn, it's like, oh, I'll just wait until my teacher teaches me. Where did your fire come from?
Well, my fire came from, and you know, it's kind of hard to quantify it. I was born with an intense curiosity, and I spent my public...
But are we all?
Well,
all?
No, we get it in varying amounts. Some people are more curious than others. Some people are more aggressive than others. Some people are more modest than others. I mean, all men are created equal is great politics and the core of the liberal philosophy. But the reality is that we are all born with different genetic gifts and different life experiences, and we are all, in fact, individuals that are going to behave very differently in the real world. For myself, I've had an excess of curiosity, especially about things scientific. I did spend my formative years in a New England farming town where there really wasn't a lot of distractions around me. We didn't even have a theater anywhere in the town. TV was not omnipresent. We only had 3 channels, and we had to get up in the barn and move the antenna around to get all of them, until we got a rotator. So most of my activity was very internally directed, things I did around the house, things I built for myself. And that...
So a lot of real life lessons then, right?
Yeah, a lot of real life lessons. I built my own crystal radio set. I tuned in a station in New York with it. I thought it was the other side of the universe. And, but, back then, science toys really were about science. And today, it's all watered...
It seems like back then, though.
Say again?
It seems like there was a lot more intellectual freedom and thought freedom, and it's like back then they wanted the youth and the young adults.
Absolutely, you are correct. You are absolutely correct. Your excellence was encouraged. They had contests. The kids would come in, and they'd get prizes. You didn't get a trophy just for showing up.
But what happened? I don't understand.
If you'll let me complete my thought here instead of continually stepping in here. One advantage we had in the 1960s, it was the beginning of the space age, and it captured our imaginations, and that's where a big part of the fire came from. The future looked like we could do anything. We're getting ready to go to space. We're going to go to the moon. We're going to go to the planets, and it just caught our imagination. We wanted all the toys. We wanted telescopes. We wanted all of that stuff. And then when we got into sort of the post-Apollo years, all of that got de-emphasized, and schools literally started, for political reasons, trying to produce identical matching students. And that was the experience I had when I taught at the high school level, because I was literally criticized for wanting to spend time with the bright students who wanted to learn instead of sitting on the dullards who didn't want to learn at all and cramming it down their throat. And, I got so disgusted I basically quit at that point. But we don't have anything in our culture that's going to inspire young people. They're looking around, seeing that crime and corruption is the way to wealth and success. They're seeing people who are trying to be entrepreneurs being crushed down by the government. Out in California, you don't have to do a thing in class. You're still going to get a C grade. We've disincentivized the desire to excel in our young people. Common Core is a big part of that. And it makes for obedient, pliant workers and soldiers. But for the long-term economic health of our country, it's an absolute unmitigated disaster.
But the imagination is still there. I mean, people, they're talking about mining asteroids, still going to the moon, still traveling.
Hey, John, let me answer, because we're running out of time and I got to move to another phone call. Imagination has actually been taken away from us, because when we were kids, we had toys like blocks and erector sets that our own imagination shaped. You go into a toy store today, everything you buy, whether it's an erector set or a Meccano, they call them now, or Lego, all you do is build somebody else's branded character. And the idea of actually thinking about something on your own is actually being discouraged with that kind of change in the toys in the toy store. Anyway, John, I got to let you go because we're coming up on the news break, and I want to talk to Mark in Texas. Mark, we've got a few minutes left. What's on your mind?
Okay, a couple of questions. What do you think of this thing about the hospitals supposedly in Russia bombed in Syria? Do you think they're making that up? And the other thing is, what about the 700 people that supposedly executed in Iran the last few months? Do you really believe that, or you think that's also being made up?
Well, you know, our government is trying to demonize everybody to sell this war to the American people. We already know the story about Russia bombing a hospital in Syria has been discredited by the Red Cross, which is on the ground in Syria, saying they have found absolutely no indications that it happened. As far as sorry?
I didn't know that. They didn't, you know, I didn't.
Yeah, we covered it earlier in the show. The Red Cross in Syria is saying, no, we can't find it. It's not there. And so I would probably not give too much credence about what Iran is doing and how bad they are. But we know that anybody who's an eventual target of the U.S. military, we're just going to hear nothing about bad things about them. We saw how hard Israel was trying to kill the P5+1 deal. The people who want war are willing to do anything to get it. Remember, you're starting out with people who are willing to see millions of others die for whatever their perceived gain happens to be. And when you start out with a moral measure like that, anything becomes possible.
Okay, I got one other question.
Real quick.
I'm a little crazy. You know, I know you're a computer expert and all that. Do you think there's a possibility that some of this stuff might have come from the Roswell crash, from that alien ship, or do you think that's nonsense?
No, what we have today is very obviously the evolution from earlier technologies to our current technologies. What crashed at Roswell was a system to detect Russian nuclear tests, and they didn't want to admit it because it was a violation of treaty. So somebody said, we'll just say it was a flying saucer, and it got completely out of control. Anyway, we got to take a break for our news and commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. And catching up on the news here, as you probably heard earlier today, there was an incident at the Fort Lauderdale, Hollywood, Florida airport in which a Boeing 767 suffered an explosion in one of the engines. And apparently the plane was all loaded up, was on its way down to South America, and some people were hurt. And the airport was actually closed for a little while here. Now then, little point of clarification. I know that Boeing has taken some hits for some of the problems with their aircraft, but there's something about aircraft and airlines you probably should keep in mind. And also, apparently, they saw fuel pouring out of this thing ahead of time. Could have been a maintenance crew problem as opposed to a rotor burst. We're not really sure. But something you need to keep in mind. Boeing sells the aircraft to airlines, but the airline decides what engine goes in there. And a lot of the budget airlines will get refurbished, reconditioned engines that may not be in the absolute best of shape. So Boeing does not get tarred for this one. Boeing does get tarred, however, for the Apache Guardian attack helicopters they just sold to the Republic of China, because apparently they've discovered material failure due to faulty production by Boeing. So that's going to turn out to be a big, huge issue there. Let's turn to Hillary Clinton. There's an article out of Activist Post, Hillary Clinton and the real issue behind the Benghazi scandal. And we need to keep reminding everybody that there is more behind this story than just, whoopsie, they got killed, what difference does it make, and the email scandal. Now, at the very least, coming out of Hillary's testimony before the Benghazi committee, for those who actually watched it and aren't falling for the corporate media's declaration of her victory and ascendancy, at the very least, she was totally incompetent as the Secretary of State. Her entire excuse for why she doesn't really get any of the blame for Benghazi was she wasn't reading the emails. 600 requests for additional security, she never saw them. That's her excuse. She was asked about the gun running going through that consulate. She said, nope, I had no idea. It was her job to know. At the very least, Hillary Clinton has shown that she is incompetent to be in charge of a government department, let alone the government as a whole. Now, Hillary's back out on the campaign trail, talking to rather small crowds in small rooms, with wide-angle camera lenses to make it look like they're bigger. And she came out with this ridiculous statement claiming that Vladimir Putin has no soul. How could he? He's a former KGB agent. Which is a bit of a hypocrisy, because if you look at how tightly the Clintons have been working with the CIA, especially during Iran-Contra, that whole gun and drug running situation, Vladimir Putin came back, and I'm paraphrasing loosely, but he said it's more important to have a brain than a soul. Oh, gotta love the guy. And I'm not saying Putin's a great guy, but he sure seems to be a statesman, as opposed to these hysterical, shrieking people. Do you realize how much Hillary is playing victim in her campaign for presidency? I'm a victim of the vast right-wing conspiracy. I'm a victim of evil people. I think we should not consider having a president who's always playing victim, especially if they have the keys to the nuclear arsenal. Story coming out of Russia today. Refugee crisis brought to you by Western imperialism, and there really is no way around it. This huge surge of people coming out of all the countries the U.S. has intervened in, pouring into Europe. It's the biggest human refugee crisis since World War II. And another reminder, we're into World War III. Now, there's an estimate, this is over in the Daily Mail in Great Britain, 1 million more migrants could head for Europe over the winter because of the Syrian war. This is an estimate by Turkey, which doesn't want the refugees in their territory. They'll take them in at the south and kick them out in the north. Say, go that way. They're saying that this refugee crisis could destroy the European Union far more thoroughly and quickly than the economic hardships brought down on them by the European Central Bank. We have a video that's on the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com. Migrants forcing their way into Austria, and you should take a look at it. This is getting very intense, and it's producing hostilities. Story coming out of Before It's News. Last week in the town of Hanover in Germany, Muslim migrants basically held a march through the city streets, flying the flag of ISIS and claiming the land for Allah. Now, maybe this was staged by people who are sick and tired of the migrant crisis. Could very easily be a piece of propaganda, but it's illustrating the fact that there is a huge backlash going on to this attempt to stir up all the people of the world into one just blended mass of workers to support the ruling class here. The Prime Minister of Bavaria has given Angela Merkel a deadline to close this open door for refugees. That's going to be a trick, because it takes 2 to 3 months for these people to make that trip. And that means there are already 3 months' worth of refugees somewhere in transit coming to Europe. Now, there's an interesting story coming out of Germany where they're trying to get all these people registered, and all of a sudden they're discovering that hundreds of them cannot be found, and they don't know where they are. Now, it's entirely possible that they have shaved their beards, they may be English speakers, they may be just been trying to blend in to the local population, or they may have decided to move on someplace. But here's the big problem. Nobody knows who these people are coming across these borders. Not just Europe, here in the U.S. We don't know what diseases they have. There's no medical examinations going on. We don't know if they are, in fact, some of the ISIS and Al-Qaeda fighters that were chased out of Syria by Russia, and now they're looking for a new home. Maybe there were criminals in their home countries, and all they know how to do is be criminals in the new countries. Now, we've got a caller here on the line. Hello, I don't have your name or where you're calling from, but who are you and what's on your mind? Hello?
Hello, my name is Gerardo. I'm calling from El Salvador, Central America.
Yes.
I have a question. We, as you probably know, we live under the slavery of the U.S. dollar. So, what do you think is the fate of countries like mine, El Salvador, and other countries that live under the U.S. dollar, with this looming crisis approaching? What do you think about that, Mike?
Well, I would hope that your government has enough sense to be starting to put together contingency plans to issue your own local currency when the dollar really starts to fall apart, because that's the only way you're going to avoid getting dragged down with the United States when it finally does happen.
Yeah, that's what I really hope. That's what I really hope, Mike. And,
yeah.
I've been a listener. This is a first-time caller, but I appreciate your time, and thanks for all the good work you're doing, Mike.
All right, well, thank you very much for the kind words, and we got to take a break for commercials. Thank you very much. And yeah, everybody, every government, local government, state government, county government, you should start planning your own government-operated monetary system to go into effect the instant the U.S. dollar falls apart, or you are going to be in a world of hurt. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're still talking about the immigration crisis, and apparently Amnesty International is wagging their finger hard at Australia over allegations that Australia's Maritime Border Control was literally paying the operators of the people smuggling ships to turn around and head back. And Amnesty International has their knickers in a twist over the fact that this increased the risk to the people trying to sneak into, in this case, specifically New Zealand. And they're accusing Canberra of colluding with a people smuggling operation by giving them money to stop smuggling people. Well, what does Amnesty International think Australia is going to do? I mean, obviously, Amnesty International's agenda is anybody has a right to come into your home. And when I see the people who actually work for Amnesty International putting up a couple of refugees inside their own houses, I might listen. But every nation has a right to control its own borders and to decide who comes in or not. We can already see here in the United States of America and all across Europe, the open borders policy being championed by the New World Order globalists is a disaster. And they don't really care. They want what they want. And what you want, you're just getting in the way. Don't see the glorious future of one planet, one government, one private central bank. Over in Great Britain, they've announced that finally, after 7 years and £10 million, the Chilcot Report into the Iraq War will be published in June or July of next year. And at this point, I don't think we're going to see anything but another high-level whitewash. That seems to be the character of government in general, and Britain especially. Look at how they covered up that whole pedophile thing. Anyway. Now, earlier in the week, we were poking fun at Common Core over this math test paper that had gone viral on the internet, where the problem was 3 times 5, and the instructions solve it using the repetitive addition method. And the student had written down 5 plus 5 plus 5 equals 15. And the teacher marked it as wrong and marked down you should have done 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 equals 15. Now, when I was a kid in school, we memorized the multiplication tables from 1 through 10. We didn't have to calculate it. We just knew it. It's much faster. It's more efficient that way. But Common Core is not about efficiency. It's about making children think they're educated while in fact handicapping them with these obfuscated, complicated ways of solving essentially simple problems. Now then, Common Core understands it's in danger, and not too surprisingly, the Southern Poverty Law Center, of which I am honored to be on their list of websites you should never, ever, ever, ever look at or your nose will fall off. Southern Poverty Law Center has come out saying that anybody opposed to Common Core are just a bunch of conspiracy theorists. Now, most of the criticism against Common Core is directed at the poor teaching methodologies. But Southern Poverty Law Center is out there saying it's a conspiracy theory that, well, whatever we're saying about it. When they go back to conspiracy theory, again, it's not like they can win the argument here. Now, as I mentioned to that caller earlier, out in California, a school district north of San Francisco has implemented a new grading system, which almost completely undermines the point of having a grading system. You can sit in a class in that school district all semester and do absolutely nothing. You will still get a C. Remember what I said to that other caller about we're disincentivizing excellence and achievement. Hearing about all these people who take their kids to athletic events and everybody gets a participation trophy. We don't want the less athletic people to feel discriminated against. It wouldn't be politically correct to give a nicer trophy to the actual winners, would it? Alrighty, we're going to grab a phone call here. Al in Canada. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Al, are you there?
Hi, Mike. How are you?
Okay, you called in earlier today, didn't you? Hello?
Yes, I did. I forgot to mention something earlier.
Okay.
Have you were talking about barrel bombs, right?
Yes.
I did a little bit of research and I found out what they are, and it may not be politically correct. But what they do is they go down to the railroads and they round up a bunch of hobos, and they stuff them in these barrels, throw in a couple of cans of beans, send them on over to Europe.
All right. You're right. It's not politically correct, which is why I'm going to laugh with you, okay? Al, I'm going to let you go. We kind of have a rule here on the show, 1 call per day, per caller, and we're going to let you go there. Now then, talking about political correctness, we don't want anybody to feel special, except for Obama. He's exceptional. We don't want you remembering your cultural, local, regional history here. And here's how absurd it's getting. Over at the Seth Boyden Elementary School in Maplewood, New Jersey, they are canceling Halloween this week. There's no decorations, there's no costumes, there's no mention of it whatsoever, under the excuse that all of the people who are in that school who come from other traditions are feeling left out because they don't understand what it's all about. They're not taking part on this whole thing. Therefore, we will take it away from the people for whom it is a tradition. So, from this, we can deduce, in the ideal, politically correct world, nobody celebrates anything because of the people with different traditions feeling left out. Nobody remembers a point of history because it might make somebody feel bad. That's what all of this is about. The attack on the Civil War flag, the attack on the war memorials and all this stuff, they're trying to erase our cultural memory. They're trying to make us forget who we are and where we came from, to make it easier to create a single global population of workers, who don't remember where they came from or who they are or why they should care about freedom and independence. This is pretty ridiculous, canceling Halloween. All right, we're coming up in our commercial break. When we come on back, a couple of words about human-caused global warming and other science stuff as well. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to talk a little bit about human-caused global warming. And there is a big stink brewing over at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And here's what's going on. Here in the real world, we understand that the global warming trend stopped in the late 1990s, and the world has been getting cooler. And a lot of people are saying, well, obviously, if the world is getting cooler, taxing carbon makes no sense whatsoever. So NOAA came out with a report in which they claimed that there has not, in fact, been any pause in global warming. That the Earth has been warming gradually from greenhouse gases. NOAA says it, therefore it must be so. And it's met a huge amount of skepticism. And Representative Lamar Smith has subpoenaed NOAA for the raw data that they used to come to this conclusion. NOAA is refusing the subpoena, saying none of your business. You just take our word for it. The world is warming. It's your fault. We must have a carbon tax. And here is NOAA's excuse for defying a congressional subpoena for the raw data. NOAA is claiming confidentiality concerns. I've never known a thermometer to insist on a right to privacy. And get this, the integrity of the scientific process. Now, if anybody from NOAA is actually listening to this, let me give you an education about how science maintains its integrity. It does it through the principle of reproducibility of results. Meaning, if I conduct an experiment and I get this result, and I publish all the details, anybody else can take the same initial conditions, perform the same steps, and they will get the same result. Reproducibility of results is at the heart of the scientific method. To deny the opportunity for outside verification while screaming that they're protecting the integrity of the scientific process, government bovine excrement does not get any more obvious than that. And so now we have a federal government agency claiming that their information is private. No, it isn't, because your tax dollars paid for it all. All of that data is the property of the American people. And NOAA has absolutely no basis whatsoever to refuse to release it. And the fact that they are going to this extreme step of keeping public records away from the Congress in defiance of a congressional subpoena, and out there saying we're protecting the integrity, we've got confidentiality, and the world is still getting warmer, and you should believe us, underscores the fact that, yeah, human-caused global warming is an absolute fraud and a hoax. Now, Greenland is growing in ice cover as we head into this winter, rapidly. Story coming out of Stephen Goddard. Greenland is blowing away all records for ice gain. Greenland has gained almost 200 billion tons of snow and ice just over the last 2 months. That's more than 50% above the normal accumulation for this time of year. Greenland gained more than 200 billion tons of ice over the last year. But the New York Times actually ran a story saying, oh, Greenland's ice is melting away. It's just going away. Really, it's a human-caused global warming. It's your fault. And, the only way you can save the planet is to pay a carbon tax. Because they're thinking none of us here are ever actually going to get up to Greenland, right? Well, not in person, no. But we linked to a live webcam at the summit station of Greenland. It's a live video feed. You can click the link and take a look at what Greenland looks like right now. Probably it's nightfall right now, so you want to wait until tomorrow. And you can decide for yourself if Greenland's ice and snow is melting away the way the New York Times says. Meanwhile, and this is not being reported in the American corporate media, northern China is being hit by major blizzards. They're getting snow in places they normally don't get snow. And in this continuing rush to demonize carbon dioxide, now they've got this story out here where high levels of CO2 can make people dumb. This is coming out of the Harvard School of Public Health. It says carbon dioxide has a direct and negative impact on human cognition and decision making. And yes, it does at high levels. But Al Gore has grabbed this study to get out the headline saying, if we don't tax carbon now, you're all going to be even worse dummies than you are under Common Core. The U.S. Department of Energy is saying that all of you people with jack-o'-lanterns for Halloween, you're causing global warming. You're unleashing all these greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. How dare you have a holiday that harms planet Earth? This is coming from the same U.S. government that is dropping bombs on dozens of countries around the world, along with radioactive waste, chemical weapons. And they want you to think your holiday pumpkin is the problem here. It's just absolutely absurd. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. And we're going to go here with Glenn in Philadelphia. And Glenn, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Wanted to talk about this stuff with Common Core and grading and this ridiculous notion that somehow we're all supposed to be codependently responsible for everybody else's feelings, no matter how irrational that might be. You know, like someone, and it's also this question, like throughout history, the concept of a reasonable, moderate shame response to doing something wrong is considered a good thing. That's why being shameless is the bad thing. The cliche of the shameless hussy, you know? So, in other words, if you sat around and didn't do your due diligence and for your book report, and you got a D, well, then maybe you should be a little ashamed and work a little harder to get a better grade on your book report, or whatever task it is, you know. But this idea that if we just keep lowering the bar all the way to the ground and make everybody else feel bad the minute somebody else, has a bad feeling, this is patently ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. I mean, the operational logic of the Common Core system seems to be we don't care if the kids are morons or not as long as they have good self-esteem.
Yeah, and it's like, of course, they can't boil an egg, balance a checkbook, or count back change, but we don't want them to feel bad about that.
Yeah, it really has reached a point of utter ridiculousness.
Oh yeah, and it's in an economy where you need people like with skill sets. I mean, it's completely contrary to the notion of developing skill sets.
You're absolutely right. I mean, when I'm flying in an airliner, I don't want a pilot who was a C student and, was just given the degree just because of political correctness. When I'm in the hospital, I don't want a doctor working on me who was just sort of shuffled through this machine and given a diploma just because he was supposed to get a diploma. We really need to re-incentivize achievement and excellence in this country. And part of that means that those who are not achieving and who are not excellent are going to be seen as socially inferior. And we've got to get back to that.
That's why I know, like, 9 times 7 is 63, and 8 times 56. And yeah, I have little brown composition books with the table in the back with the times tables up through 12.
Yes.
Yes, it's like, yeah, we drilled on that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? It does, anyway, so it's obviously, I just hope something turns this insanity around. Take care.
All right. Do you know the value of pi? I guess he hung up. All right. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the last segment of our program today here, and we've got some late-breaking stories we need to share with you. Just posted a YouTube video on how the United States is refusing to recognize the South China Sea islands as Chinese territory. Thump chest, thump chest, thump chest. China's issuing warnings here. But there's something that maybe everybody ought to keep in mind before this gets out of control. Those islands are somebody's territory, And the U.S. does not have a right to violate that territory regardless of who it belongs to, because it sure as heck does not belong to the United States of America. This is just more provocation to try and start a war, because the bozos in Washington, D.C. have wrecked the greatest nation on earth, and they can't think of anything else to do. Can't fix it. Let's just blow it all up. Amazing. Now, getting on back to the idiocy of our schools and this intention to make us all forget who we are so we all be useful to the New World Order. Over in California, in a school, a 12-year-old student was forced to turn his American flag T-shirt inside out because the school administrators said it was gang-related. Remember that other school in Arizona is banning all USA, U.S. flag, whatever, because it makes the Hispanics feel bad. They're trying to erase who we are. They're trying to take our past, our heritage, away from us so that we'll be of more use to the New World Order. Now then, important story. This is just now coming out. The European Parliament just voted in favor of dropping charges against Edward Snowden. Now, given that Edward Snowden didn't blow the whistle on anything going on in Europe, I don't know what charges they would have had to begin with. But the European Parliament is now directing the European Union member states drop all criminal charges against Edward Snowden and to grant him protection and prevent extradition or rendition by third parties, meaning the United States of America. The European Parliament has officially recognized Edward Snowden's status as a whistleblower and an international human rights defender. And this is what the United States gets for sicking the NSA not just on the law-abiding American people, but the law-abiding Europeans. And now that Snowden can go in and out of Europe without fear, we're going to see a lot more of him on TV in Europe. Now, up in Iceland, as you know, they have been throwing their crooked bankers into prison for what they did back in 2008. One of the banks that was at the heart of that is going to be sold, liquidated, Iceland Banki. And the proceeds from that sale will be divided up among all the people of Iceland. We need more of that here in the United States of America. We cannot have a protected criminal class in Wall Street, or for that matter, Washington, D.C. No nation can survive a protected criminal class in power. No nation ever has. No nation ever will. Out in Los Angeles, a gentleman named Chad Rattray has died of the flu. He'd gotten his flu shot. Got his flu shot, died of the flu. And we're seeing that all over the place. These vaccines are not protecting you from illness. They are, in fact, triggering the illness you think you're being protected from. Whether it's just a mistake or it's just a way of maximizing profits by intentionally starting measles and mumps outbreaks. Just got to stick one person with the needle. They infect a whole bunch of others, and everybody panics and runs to the pharmacy. Vaccines are a multi-billion-dollar-a-year scam. Okay, apparently over at British Gas, they've been hacked. Third major UK security breach in a week, following Marks & Spencer and TalkTalk. The NSA can't find the criminals. Maybe the NSA are the criminals. Remember, Kaspersky Labs identified the Equation Group hacking team as being the NSA. And that, too, is probably a reason why the European Parliament just gave the NSA the political finger, so to speak, here. As you remember, not too long ago, the British government reported that all of the collected data of accusations and evidence against these elitist pedophile rings had been accidentally and permanently deleted. And we basically called them on that, saying that anybody who understands how computers works understands that if you delete something, it's still on the disk, it's still recoverable. And the UK Telegraph is saying, no, this stuff was deliberately purged. The British government is closing ranks to protect these slime balls in the British media and the British government who get their jollies molesting little tiny children. We can't let the public know. It would undermine confidence in the government. Well, frankly, deleting the database did that. Apparently, one new use that they're planning for the onboard computers of your cars, which are more and more sophisticated, they're going to be reporting not only your driving habits, but the driving conditions to your auto insurance company. So that if you have a tendency to drive more in stormy weather, which is higher risk, they will raise your premiums. Oh, you're in high-risk activity, you're driving in the rain. Well, I didn't want to make my kid walk to school in the rain. Well, that's okay, but you have to pay to drive in the rain. I maybe could understand if they wanted to make sure you weren't breaking the speed limit habitually, but this idea of penalizing you based on the environmental conditions in which you drive the car, I think that's a little bit over the top. Absolutely. Now, over at the MIT's Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Lab, they've come up with a new whiz-bang gadget, which is probably going to be immediately classified and grabbed by the military. They've apparently come up with a system where they can image your entire room, including the people in it, based on a Wi-Fi emitter. So here in this office, I got a Wi-Fi emitter over here. The people from MIT could be outside my house with this gizmo, and they will see a view, an image, a reconstruction of my room. And I understand how that can work, and that's going to be the next thing the government is going to be using to peek into your lives and make sure you're not thinking those double plus ungood thoughts here. We're getting a report here out of Zero Hedge. There has been a record swarm of very tiny California earthquakes, and it's got people worried. Is it a precursor to something big? And by the way, we're having a swarm of small quakes down on the Big Island. Some of them are very, very deep. So the earth is kind of rocking and rolling a little bit. Okay, NASA's Cassini spacecraft went through a geyser, if you will, from Saturn's moons Enceladus, and hopefully they're going to get some data from that, confirming whether or not there's water underneath all that ice. They found molecular oxygen on the comet that Rosetta is following along, Comet Churyumov-Gerasimenko. Say that 3 times fast. And here's a bogus story that you just have to think about. What are they thinking? There's a 19-year-old woman down in Florida who just got served with legal papers claiming that she owes child support for an 11-year-old child she's accused of being the father of. Okay? Now, this is a woman. She hasn't had any children. Supposedly, she fathered this child when she was 8 years old, according to the court documents. And she can't get anybody at the courthouse to say this is an obvious mistake. And she's going to have to hire a lawyer. Attitude of the government? We are the government. We are never wrong. Yeah, they are, quite a bit. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Please keep calling your local talk radio stations. Point them at gcnlive.com. Ask them to carry our programming. It is working. We are getting more affiliates. Thank you to all the Riveros Rangers. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.